The first thing I learned in prison was that I was nobody. Any day could be my last. I needed to be small, but strong. I needed to be humble, but brave. I also needed to read a lot, work out and get a job in the law library. I needed a squad of 2 or 3 select comrades to eat, play cards and walk around the yard with. I needed to avoid drugs, gambling and sex, all sources of potential conflict. I needed to be smart, think ahead and plan. If backed in a corner, I needed to stand tall. Overall, I needed to love my mutilated life, to be hopeful and not fear death. I learned these and other lessons during almost 13 years in prison for manslaughter, before being paroled in 2003. Anthony Weiner, the disgraced former congressman and mayoral candidate who has been sentenced to prison himself for sexting a 15-year-old girl, would be wise to keep this advice in mind as he contemplates how to survive and become a better human being, or at least not a worse one. It isn't easy, but it can be done. Jeffrey Deskovic, 43, spent 16 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. Today, Deskovic runs a foundation in his name that seeks to exonerate wrongly convicted prisoners. To date, the foundation has freed 6 wrongfully convicted men. If I was to give advice to Anthony Weiner, I would tell him to talk to the other prisoners who come from different social-economic backgrounds, Deskovic says. As he hears their stories, while simultaneously experiencing prison for himself, maybe that will open his eyes and he can try to change some things when he gets out. When I was released, I enrolled in NYU. In 2006, after graduating with a bachelor's degree, I found steady work as a news photographer. The gig gave me a front row seat to Weiner's slow-motion self-destruction, beginning with the 2008 Democratic National Convention, when I photographed him for the first time. He and I were standing backstage as Hillary Clinton addressed the delegates, conceding her loss to Barack Obama. Weiner, I figured, was waiting for Huma Abedin, Hillary's longtime, loyal assistant, because that spring they started dating. When Clinton finished speaking, 2 young campaign staffers came running out, in tears. Huma followed, but her face was placid as she scanned the crowd for Weiner. I had my camera in my hands, ready to capture what I envisioned would be a touching, tender moment. I expected Weiner to hug her, and whisper some comforting or comical words in her ear. Instead, Weiner turned his back and walked away. I was at a press conference in 2011 when Weiner cried and confessed to sexting a college student but refused to resign from Congress. 10 days later, he did just that. I was there in 2013, when he promised to have put his compulsive sexting habit behind him, and announced his candidacy for mayor of New York City, and I took his picture a few months later as he announced he was exiting the campaign because he had been caught sexting yet another woman. This past May, Weiner pleaded guilty to federal obscenity charges. He admitted to engaging in obscene communications with a 15-year-old girl, knowing she was 15. According to federal prosecutors, he used graphic and obscene language to ask the minor victim to display her naked body and touch herself, which she did. While most nonviolent federal offenders who received light sentences such as Weiner's go to so-called minimum security club-fed federal prison camps, Weiner's crime could be classified as a sex crime, according to Larry Levine, a former federal prisoner who operates Wall Street Prison Consultants, a service that advises people headed to federal prison on how best to survive. He will never see a minimum security camp, Levine says. He is going to an FCI, or Federal Correctional Institute. It's gonna be like culture shock to him. FCIs, Levine says, are significantly more dangerous than a minimum security camp. You got people serving a lot of time, things get rough, things get violent. Every FCI I was at, people were getting their asses kicked. People get stabbed with broom handles. People get brutally beat with folding chairs. Weiner's lawyers, in fact, anticipated Weiner being sent to an FCI instead of a camp. They asked the judge who sentenced Weiner to send him to FCI Schuylkill, in Pennsylvania, but the decision will ultimately be up to the Bureau of Prisons. Levine is not optimistic about Weiner's chances, he cried in the courtroom. Inmates get this information. The inmate population will view him as a whiny, crybaby bitch. He showed a sign of weakness and that's gonna hurt him. He's gonna have hard time. If I was to give him advice, Levine says, I'd tell him to show a lot of respect and keep his fucking mouth shut. Do not be a know-it-all. Don't get involved in drama and especially don't get involved in politics. Maybe he'll get out in one piece. When I was away, or up north as we called it in New York, we called sex offenders tree jumpers. Oh.